Hey everyone, welcome to Rosie's Dessert Spot. Today we are creating something different. So this is going to be a photography tutorial for an upcoming ebook that I am creating for recipes. Here I've created my mud cake and some dark chocolate ganache. I've just stacked them like normal and now I'm creating a final layer of frosting in ganache. So for those of you who enjoy photography, this is going to be a really good little demonstration of my process and how I like to photograph my cakes. So I hope this is helpful for you in some way for your business. I'm just going to go really rustic with this. I've got my offset spatula. I created a bit of an indent at the top and now I'm just creating some indents on the side of the cake as well, just to have some texture and allow some shadows and highlights in that frosting. From here I'm going to set up my scene. I have a backdrop, which is just a paper printed backdrop, and I'm using my bench top and some artificial lighting to the right. I like to add lots of layers in my photo, hence why I've got the plates stacked on top of the other, and right at the back there's a cake stand which adds lots of height. Choose the prettiest side of your cake and cut out a nice chunky slice. You can lay that flat so that it shows in the background. I'm basically trying to get those highlights and shadows in the side there. I'll need another slice for the actual hero of the image, which will be the front piece of cake. I actually switched it out. I like the thicker, larger piece to be in the front, and I left that skinnier side for the background just to fill. And then I have the rest of the cake on the stand in the back. I'm positioning them in such a way that they're framing the cake that's right at the front, and then I'm adding little props like forks and the cake slicing tool. And that's our setup. So let's move on to the photography side of things. So I'm going to let you guys jump straight into my camera, and I'm using my 50mm on my Sony a7 IV. I've got the grid on so I can center my slice of cake to that grid. I like it in the middle, and you can see I'm kind of aiming for that crumb to be in focus. You want that texture to really show through. I also raised it so I could see the texture on the very top as well, rather than just the sides. And then have some fun, reposition your props and your hero subject. Sometimes you'll find that the original vision you had in your head never really makes it to being the final product that you actually edit. I've got my little square so I can shift more accurately where I want the focus. Try to get the areas that are nicely lit up. Whatever part of your image produces the most light is usually where your eye is going to go. So I could have turned that cake plate a little bit more towards the light really, but it still turned out okay. And I've got the back cake framing the side and the flowers framing from the other side as well, just adding some fun elements. My favorite shot ended up being this one where it was angled at a 45 degrees down towards the cake. Now that photos are done, I can jump on the computer and I'll show you guys how to edit these photos, or how I would go about editing. I like to use Lightroom for editing, and I'll start off with the exposure, just bringing it up, and I'm paying attention to the histogram up top. I don't want that wave to reach the very edge, otherwise it's going to be too blown out. Send down those highlights, up those shadows. It looks really uncontrasted at the moment. I like that look, because then I go ahead into the tone curve, and that's where I add the contrast. Rather than shifting the contrast dial or the whites and the darks, I like to manipulate contrast in this graph here. And I also like to use these little gadgets at the bottom here. So I got the highlights, and then I up the lights, and then I bring in a bit of those darks by dragging them towards the left. This is the before and after, so you can see how much contrast that adds. Just to add a little bit more light again, I'm going into the luminance sliders for the orange and bringing it up slightly, and for the yellow as well. That just adds a little bit more light into the cake. And then just play around with the exposure sliders up top, the whites, the blacks, and the shadows until you're happy with the general look. here is a before and after of everything that we've applied so far, and I'm going to add a little bit of sharpening through the clarity slider. I'm also going to up the vibrance just a touch as well. And you do not want to go too far with clarity. A little goes a long, long way before it starts to look a little bit artificial. And rather than creating clarity all over the image, you can also create it with a mask. So I've just taken the brush mask and I'm creating that just in the crumb. That way that's the only area, so the slice of cake at the front is the only area that's really highlighted in terms of texture and sharpness, and it just helps to draw the eye to that spot. Here I was looking for the clarity slider, just couldn't find it. It was somewhere in the bottom here. Perfect. Don't want to go too far because it could look a little unrealistic. You could also add extra sharpness by manipulating the whites and the blacks, so it kind of adds a bit of contrast like that as well. Super subtle, but it does make a difference. Another slider that you should not take for granted is your temperature slider. I always gravitate towards a cooler looking image, especially when it comes to food. I just find that it's so much more tantalizing when it's a little bit cooler compared to if it's warmer. And then to help draw the eye back into the middle a little more, I'm going to add a bit of a vignette with a mask. And I've just used the radial gradient for that. You can bring down the highlights or the exposure or the shadows. Those will all help to darken up the space around the cake. Readjust your crop, copy it over into your other images that made the cut, and because the lighting conditions were exactly the same, just a simple copy and paste will be enough to edit the other images. Reposition so that your cake is within that rule of thirds in a way that you like. And then here I'm just applying the same sharpness technique that I created for the previous image. Now that I've learnt where it is, I can just go straight down into the clarity. There's also sharpen at the bottom as well, you can use that too. And then it's time to export. So I like to export in JPEG. I'm saving it to a folder that has just the edited images inside it. And make sure that your quality is at 100% for best results. I always export in a few different formats. So this is the original orientation that kind of just came straight out of the camera. Then I'll go into the crop tool and I'll select the 16:9. So that's for your stories, or at least at the time of recording this video, this is the standard for like your story posts on Instagram and whatnot. And also for those who like to view social media through their phones. Then I have square because square is also a very popular format to use. And then lastly, I like to go for the 4x5. I find that if you were to reprint this into a book, which is what I'll be using it for, this is probably the most common format to use. And that is my step-by-step process on how I like to photograph my cakes and edit. I hope this was helpful for you in some way. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you again in the next one.